I'm Nima Rajan. Canada's stockpile of COVID-19 vaccines is about to get a big boost to the tune of 3.3 million doses. Almost 1.2 million shots of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine are expected to arrive this week. Meanwhile, Oxford AstraZeneca is sending a truck from the U.S. tomorrow packed with 1.5 million doses. And a week after, coming up short on a delivery, Moderna is set to make up the difference with the delivery of 600,000 shots on Thursday. Health Canada has approved 10 vaccines in the past 4 years, and half of them are for COVID-19. Dr. Supriya Sharma, the Chief Medical Advisor at Health Canada, says she has never seen anything like the speed with which the COVID-19 vaccines got approved. The average time for a COVID-19 vaccine to be approved was 82 days. In previous years, the average approval time for non-COVID vaccines was just under 400 days. Dr. Sharma assures the swift approval process for COVID-19 vaccines is still being held to the same high safety standards. Communities along the Canada-U.S. border have faced unique challenges since it was closed to all but essential traffic last March to curb the spread of COVID-19. Jim Willett, the mayor of Coutts, Alberta, says it feels like someone has just erased a year. In southern Manitoba, David Carlson, Reeve of Emerson Franklin, says the shutdown has hurt his community's economic prospects. But he adds people aren't in a rush to see that the border is reopened and want a cautious, safe approach. There's a new round of We Charity sparring between the opposition parties and the Liberals. A Conservative-sponsored motion passed by the House of Commons last week is calling for senior members of the Prime Minister's staff to testify before the Ethics Committee. Government House Leader Pablo Rodriguez says staff are not elected members and they do not have the same rights and privileges as MPs. The opposition says the PM will be guilty of violating the will of Parliament if neither he nor his staff appear. Federal Infrastructure Minister Catherine McKenna says new dedicated transit funding for rural communities doesn't necessarily have to go to traditional systems. Ottawa is setting aside $250 million over 5 years for the endeavour. Ms. McKenna says there are some creative transit solutions that have caught the government's attention, from app-based on-demand services to ride-sharing arrangements. She says the government needs to make sure that transit funding considers rural communities and is not solely focused on how to get people around major urban centres. Public policy think tank secondstreet.org released public opinion research today that shows significant opposition to the federal government's proposal to raise the carbon tax every year for the next 9 years. The poll was conducted by Leger between March 17th and 24th. Secondstreet.org President Colin Craig says results show that 52% of Canadians do not support the government's plan to raise the carbon tax every year for the next 9 years, and almost half of all Canadians believe raising the carbon tax will hurt struggling businesses. Canada's Defence Minister says descendants of Canada's only all-black unit to serve in the First World War deserve an apology. Harjit Sajjan paid tribute to the 600 members of the No. 2 Construction Battalion on Sunday, saying that they faced racism despite their willingness to serve their country. Mr. Sajjan says plans are in the works for a formal apology from Ottawa, which will highlight the fact that hundreds of black men in Canada were turned away when they volunteered to fight overseas in 1914. Molson Coors Beverage Company says it continues to experience delays and disruptions in its business in Canada, the UK, and the US, resulting from a cyber attack disclosed earlier this month. The Denver and Montreal-based company says it has made substantial progress in restoring its systems, with all breweries producing and shipping products and ramping up to normal operating levels. But it says despite receiving help from leading tech experts, the cyber incident is still impacting its brewery operations, production, and shipments in the 3 countries. Canada has fallen short on its bid for its first Olympic men's soccer berth in 37 years. Uriel Antuna and Johan Vasquez scored to lift Mexico to a 2-0 victory over Canada in the do-or-die semifinals of the Men's Olympic Qualifying Championship on Sunday. The Mexicans, who won Olympic gold in 2012, clinched their 12th Olympic berth with the victory. The Canadian men, which haven't played on the Olympic stage since 1984, are forced to wait another 3 years. There's a new study out on what Canadians think life will be like once the pandemic is finally over. It suggests that most people believe COVID-19 will have negative consequences on mental health, travel, and the economy. However, on a more positive note, Others feel that the pandemic will bolster online shopping and make public mask wearing more common. The University of Saskatchewan's Jason DeSano says overall, there is a lot of uncertainty about what communities will look like in a post-pandemic world. All right, stay tuned. Up next, we take a deeper look into the pay raises that federal employees are set to get on April 1st. We speak with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation up next. That and more news after the break. Canadian MPs are set to get an automatic pay raise in the coming days that would amount to over $3,000 extra added to their annual salaries, paid for by Canadian taxpayers. Senators, government ministers, the leader of the opposition, as well as the Prime Minister, are also going to get thousands of dollars of taxpayer money automatically added to their salaries. This comes as over 700,000 private sector jobs were lost over the last year. Within the province of Alberta alone, over 76,000 private sector jobs were eliminated, while at the same time, over 5,000 government jobs were added, according to Statistics Canada. Last spring, government officials were facing criticism over accepting pay raises while increasing the federal carbon tax amid the pandemic. This led Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, former Conservative leader Andrew Scheer, and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh to be among a number of MPs who donated their automatic pay increases to charity last year. However, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation says this pay increase needs to be scrapped altogether, considering the inequities between private sector and government jobs. Well, to talk more on this, joining us now is Mr. Franco Terrazzano, Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Always great having you on Forum Daily, sir.
Hey, well, thank you so much for having me on today.
Now, we spoke a little on salary ranges in our intro, but let's get into specific numbers, Mr. Terrazzano. How much money in pay raises are we talking about here for individual MPs and other government officials?
Well, I think it's pretty safe to say that a pandemic and severe economic downturn that we're facing right now is probably the worst possible time for our politicians to be padding their wallets. But like a cruel April Fool's joke for taxpayers, our MPs are set to get a pay raise on April 1st. And the pay raise breaks down to about $3,200 for your backbench MP. It's over $6,000 for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. That's what we're estimating. And it's important to remember here that our politicians are very well compensated in Canada. Your basic MP is making over $180,000. The Prime Minister is making well over $300,000. So I think many struggling taxpayers are rightly going to see this pay raise as a slap in the face.
And how has this pay raise been impacted over the years? Has it decreased or increased gradually?
Well, this is an annual automatic pay change, and this is the second pay increase that we're seeing for MPs during this COVID-19 downturn. I mean, we've been in this downturn with COVID-19 for a year now. So why is it taking so long for our MPs to get off their butts and to actually make some change here for taxpayers? And I need to point out that there is precedent to stop the automatic pay increase. We saw that under the Harper government in response to that 08-09 recession. And we've also seen politicians all over the world take a pay cut almost right away. When COVID-19 first happened, we saw New Zealand's prime minister, ministers, and top bureaucrats take a 20% pay cut to show solidarity with struggling taxpayers. And we need to see something like that here.
Now, last spring, leaders were facing some criticism for accepting this pay increase. Do we have any promises to donate these pay increases as previous MPs did last year?
Well, we do. We've got correspondence from about 90 members of parliament who have said either that they are against this automatic pay raise or that they're going to be donating that money to charity. And you know what? That's all fine and dandy, but it's not enough because we shouldn't be seeing taxpayers paying for pay raises for MPs, especially during this severe economic downturn. So what we want to see is something similar to what we saw in New Zealand, what we're seeing in other parts of Canada. We've seen politicians, councillors in Halifax, councillors in Lethbridge, Alberta, near my neck of the woods, who have actually taken a pay cut. And that's what we want to see from our MPs.
Now, we're speaking a little bit about inequities in pay between private sector and government jobs. In what other ways are disparities between these two sectors apparent, sir?
Well, you know, we have seen a budding divide between taxpayers and government employees across Canada, especially during COVID-19. You know, we've seen hundreds of thousands of private sector jobs vanish, but across the country over the last year, we've seen an increase in the number of government jobs. And all that means is a higher tax burden for struggling families and struggling businesses who can least afford it. And, I'm in here in Alberta, and through Freedom of Information requests, we've also found that nearly 30,000 government employees received a pay raise during lockdowns in 2020. So that's really a slap in the face for the many private sector workers who took a pay cut, who may have lost their job, or who may have lost their business and life savings.
All right, Mr. Terrazzano, about 30 seconds left, but what can Canadians do to voice their concerns around this yearly pay increase?
Well, you have to contact your member of parliament, share with them your story that you're going through, and let them know that you do not support a pay raise, and that it's time for them to get off their butts and make something happen and stop the automatic pay increase.
All right, Mr. Terrazzano, always great having you on Forum Daily, sir. Thank you again for your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
And we'll be right back, everyone. Stay tuned. Police are expected to release more details in their investigation of Saturday's stabbing spree in and around a library in North Vancouver. The attacks at Lynn Valley Public Library left a young woman dead, and police say 6 other people were also stabbed or expected to survive. The Integrated Homicide Investigation Team says Yannick Bandigo is in police custody after undergoing surgery for self-inflicted wounds. Sergeant Frank Jang says the alleged attacker has had interactions with police in the past and has a criminal record. Hundreds gathered in Vancouver yesterday to condemn anti-Asian racism, while similar rallies were held in Penticton and the Tri-Cities. The events come in the wake of shootings in Atlanta, Georgia, which many have called a hate crime, and amid a surge in anti-Asian racism at home. Statistics presented to the Vancouver Police Board in January showed anti-Asian hate crimes were up more than 700% in the city last year. Officials say grass fires in southern Alberta were brought under control Sunday, hours after a village began evacuating. Residents of Carmangay, Atlanta, who were forced from their homes earlier in the day, were told that they could return in the evening. Police said that the fire spanned between 11 and 16 kilometers across. Carmangay Mayor Stacey Hovd said firefighters worked tirelessly to rein in the fire, which was just a few kilometers away from this village. The Saskatchewan Health Authority is expanding mobile testing in the areas of Moose Jaw, where the province says variants of concern are increasing. Health officials in Saskatchewan are now advising residents of Moose Jaw to follow the same public health restrictions as Regina. Extra restrictions took effect in Regina and surrounding areas yesterday, including a ban on in-person dining in restaurants. Last week, the province recommended people avoid traveling into or out of Regina unless it was absolutely necessary. A study that looked at cardiac arrests within the area of Saskatoon's Royal University Hospital shows the average age of First Nations patients is much younger. Lead author Philip Davis's team is now reviewing data on all heart attack victims admitted to Royal University Hospital. Early findings suggest that First Nations people tend to be struck at a younger age, 10 years younger than other Canadians. Hamilton is entering the grey lockdown phase of the province's pandemic response plan today, and the Eastern Ontario Health Unit is going red. The stricter measures are coming into force as a third wave of the pandemic washes over the province. But the government is also loosening some rules in grey zones and will start allowing outdoor fitness classes as of today. 10 more public health units are lowering the minimum age for vaccine appointments today. The regions, including Hamilton, Peel, and Ottawa, will allow those 70 years and older to book their shots through the provincial system. The minimum age remains 75 in much of the province. Meanwhile, a drive-through vaccination site at Canada's Wonderland theme park and 2 more mass vaccination sites in Toronto will open today. The professional order representing Quebec physicians is asking the province to reconsider its decision to relax some health measures that were put in place to limit the spread of COVID-19. The Collège des Médecins de Québec says that the Legault government should consider changing its plan to take into account expert opinions as well as various alarm bells that have sounded in recent days. Hospitalizations have declined by 1 to 480, but the number of people in intensive care increased by 6 to 114. Newfoundland and Labrador's election results could end up being contested in court after multiple issues with voters. The governing Liberals, led by Premier Andrew Furey, secured a 2-seat majority when the vote counts were announced on Saturday.
Today is a moment's pause. A pause in a journey that for me began a year ago, with a head full of ideas on the difference I wanted to make for the people of our province. How I refuse to be swayed by the many opinions of those who have written this place off. Yes, last March does feel like a lifetime ago. But I think back on how many miles I've traveled since then, the communities I've visited, the many faces, young and old, I've met with, listened to, and most importantly, learned from. It feels like every one of them is in this room today.
In February, election officials suspended in-person voting and switched to mail-in ballots because of a COVID-19 outbreak. The provinces of Atlantic Canada reported a combined 9 new cases of COVID-19 on Sunday. Health officials say 6 of the new infections were in New Brunswick, all but 1 in the Edmundston area. Nova Scotia counted 2 new cases, both in the province's central zone. Newfoundland and Labrador reported 1 new case, a man in his 40s who was infected while traveling in Canada. All right, stay tuned. We've got top stories from around the world coming up after the break as the opening statements begin in the U.S. trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin. Meanwhile, a newlywed couple is being blamed for a suicide attack in Indonesia. And good news for international trade as the Suez Canal may be freed soon from a giant cargo ship blockage. More news from around the world coming up next on the Forum Daily, everyone. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Opening statements are set for today in the trial of a white Minneapolis police officer charged in the death of a black man. Derek Chauvin is accused of murder and manslaughter in the death of George Floyd, a killing that was caught on camera and sparked global outrage. Mr. Floyd was declared dead on May 25th after Mr. Chauvin pressed his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for about 9 minutes. Mr. Floyd was handcuffed at the time and pleading that he could not breathe. Indonesian authorities say a recently married couple with suspected militant links used pressure cookers to blow themselves up outside a Roman Catholic cathedral during Palm Sunday Mass. The attack wounded 20 people, including 4 church guards, and broke windows at the church and nearby buildings in Makassar. The couple were believed to have been members of the Jemaah Ansharut Daulah, which has pledged allegiance to the Islamic State group. The huge container ship that has been wedged sideways in the Suez Canal since last Tuesday is free. Canal service provider Leth Agencies says that workers were able to refloat the Ever Given with the help of a high tide and a flotilla of tugboats. The Ever Given was holding up $9 billion in global trade per day. About 12% of global trade by volume goes through the Suez Canal, and it accounts for 30% of the world's daily shipping container freight. Thai authorities along the country's border with Myanmar are bracing for a possible influx of more ethnic Karen villagers fleeing new airstrikes by the Myanmar military. Myanmar aircraft carried out 3 strikes overnight on Sunday, according to Free Burma Rangers, a humanitarian relief agency. On Sunday, about 2,500 people crossed the river dividing the 2 countries after 2 days of aerial attacks. The airstrikes mark an escalation in the increasingly violent crackdown by the Myanmar government against opponents of the February 1st military takeover. China is stepping up pressure on foreign shoe and clothing brands, calling on them to reject reports of human rights abuses in Xinjiang. Nike, Adidas, and other brands have been caught up in the conflict between Beijing and Western governments over the confinement of millions of Uyghurs and other predominantly Muslim ethnic minorities. The Chinese government continues to brush off complaints of abuses and says the camps are for job training to support economic development and combat Islamic radicalism. Chile's president is asking Congress to delay a 2-day election to select the drafters of a new constitution until May because of the coronavirus pandemic. President Sebastián Piñera says that the voting to elect 155 Chileans to the Constitutional Assembly should be held on May 15th to 16th instead of April 10th to 11th as now scheduled. The president calls it a very difficult decision, but says it is needed to protect everyone's health and life amid a new surge in coronavirus infections. The virus that has killed more than 2.7 million people globally in the past year likely started with transmission between a human and a bat through another animal. That's the finding of a soon-to-be-released report by the World Health Organization in China. Speculation that COVID-19 was leaked from a Chinese lab is largely dismissed in the report. The study also offers little new insight into exactly how the virus began to spread around the globe. The number of patients in intensive care in France is fast approaching a new peak. The French government counts of COVID-19 patients in ICUs and hospital surveillance units climbed to 4,872 on Sunday night. That is just short of the last peak of 4,919 ICU cases on November 16th, when France was also gripped by a virus surge that was locked down in response. The latest climb in ICU cases is again putting pressure on doctors who are sounding the alarm that they may have to start turning patients away from ICU care. England is starting off the work week with a major ease of the coronavirus lockdown it implemented at the start of the year. One of the highly anticipated changes is allowing families and friends to once again gather in outdoor spaces. And as if right on cue, the weather is turning, with temperatures rising to levels more akin to southern Spain at this time of year. Still, many aspects of the lockdown remain in place, with the government stressing that it is taking cautious approaches to lifting the restrictions. A Winnipeg woman who specializes in tracking down discontinued plates, glasses, and cutlery says business is brisk during the pandemic. Janice Perkins says people are home more and are using time to go through their stuff, replacing valuables that have gone astray. In the last 12 months, her business, called Missing Pieces, has located 332 vintage soup bowls, 1,583 dinner plates, and 502 mugs for customers across the globe. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for news on demand, you can always visit our website at thenewsforum.ca, and be sure to follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also watch all our news and commentary programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. All right, thanks for joining us on the Forum Daily, and we'll see you next time.